Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle program, defining concepts in current media, and I'm your host, Chris Angle. I'm the author of 4 books on philosophy, one of which is the Philosophical Equations of Economics, and they're available free for viewing online at www.philosophypublishing.com. With me is my co-host and colleague, Rick Samuelson. Rick graduated from Yale and Wharton as an venture capitalist out in the West Coast. How you doing, Rick?
Very well. Happy New Year.
So this week we're going to talk about what's happening generally in current media, an ongoing topic which I'm going to call, and I've heard other people call, the Chickification of the American male. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because there's an ongoing assault on boys in school and feeding them drugs to tone them down so they aren't so active. But that's in combination with some other things I've seen in media, and more recently in November on one of the Rush Limbaugh radio shows. Rush talked about a soccer team, a male soccer team, that was found to be rating the new recruits of the female soccer team. I think it was Harvard University. The male team was assigning a point score of 1 to 10, 10 being, of course, the best. And this was relevant to the physical beauty of the females on the female soccer team. Horrors, man. Can you imagine at Harvard, when the school administration heard of this, being good leftists, they had to penalize these males. So they canceled the rest of their games for the year. Well done, guys. Well done, those progressive utopian Democrats on the in the administration there at Harvard. Can you imagine how bad they thought that was? The males actually assigning numbers to females representing their female beauty? Is this the most brash, crude, horrible behavior on earth? Does it not remind you of Donald Trump and his remark? It was in the news media dug up on his crass remark on some female or females in general. I can't really say much about it because I didn't hear the video, or I don't even know if it was a video. Maybe it was an audio bite. But I know there was much to do about it in the media, because in the secondary media I remember hearing about it all the time for a couple weeks. But then again in December it comes up again. On December 3rd, I saw it on Drudge, an Associated Press article. Harvard says Harvard puts men's cross-country team on athletic probation. I'm going to read it here. Harvard University has placed its men's cross-country team on athletic probation after school lawyers found that the 2014 team made crude and sexualized documents about the women's cross-country team. Let's see what else they said on this. They said Harvard Athletic Director Robert Scalise sent an email to team members Friday night. He says no problems were found with the current team, and they've been truthful and forthright about shortcomings in the team's culture. Probation means the runner's behavior will be monitored. Scalise had asked for an investigation after the Harvard Crimson student newspaper reported that the men's team produced yearly spreadsheets about the women's team, sometimes rating appearances and making lewd comments. Harvard canceled its men's soccer team this fall after finding that soccer players created a similar document with sexually explicit comments about women's soccer players. But there are other excoriations in the past, and we can all remember the famous Duke lacrosse players being really drummed right out of the university, and as I mentioned before, the ongoing drugging of kids and boys really in the public school system. And so there's really an ongoing chickification of the American male. You see it all the time on media. So I think it's time for the philosophical to come in the philosophical angle to come in and make a few comments and about the situation for the edification of all those sitting back in horror and shock over this situation. So let's rescue them from their mental consternation. I'm sure that the penalty ascribed to these crude soccer boys was certainly not enough in the eyes of the left. Just canceling their games probably, I'm sure doesn't assuage their, that is the left's, feelings for revenge on male attitude. So I think the school's response should have been supplemented with forced ingestion of some sort of medical pharmaceutical application that would change the behavior of these, as the Bard would say, base football players, and bring them into line with what they should be. Well, in the before this administration of pharmaceutical solution that I'm advocating, let's give an explanation of why this type of behavior occurs at all by males. I think we have to invoke the discipline of biological anthropology here to start. So in some circles they call it physical anthropology. But in anthropological and biological anthropological theory, there are some very basic tenets that might help to explain this. And and it's going to shock you, audience. But first is that the sperm travels to the egg. And yes, I know how crass and crude and how fundamental that is. But and you probably can't even imagine why I would bring it up. But there it is. It might be useful in understanding a complicated social justice problem, as we have about the male soccer team, by just going to some very basic biology. So let's take a look at the whole story. Now, there's a reason why the sperm must travel to the egg. The egg must be stationary because of gestation, and somebody has to nurture that egg to fruition to produce an offspring. And the females are nominated for this job. So there it is. Therefore, the biological variation purposes, for these purposes, a set of genes coming from another entity has to be provided, as we all know, from basic biology from high school. And because the sperm must travel to the egg, the action this travel invites something called risk into the situation. And because there's distance and speed, this invokes an absolute possibility of, or greater possibility of risk. And as something would happen to the sperm on the way to the egg, there is inherent risk in the situation. So with that, I know that all you feminists are yelling that the egg has its own risk, which is true. It's less physical risk overall, and in addition, it's a different type of risk, and so nature deals with it in a different manner. So there's risk, and in order for nature to bring the situation equal between the sperm and the egg, it has to increase the number of sperm, and this creates an equal risk between the two types of reproductive facilities, making it equal, making that risk equal, as biology and evolution are wont to do. So now you have multiple sperm going to and searching out for the egg, but now you have a question of why should the sperm travel to the egg? That is, why should it even bother to expend its energy and undergo the risk to get to the egg? Well, nature, of course, knows that the species must reproduce. Therefore, it has to add something else to the situation in order to provide motivation for the sperm to travel. So nature knows there's to be motivation, and it has to provide that for the human sperm to travel to the female egg for reproductive purposes. And if it doesn't provide the motivation, the assurance that reproduction will occur is nugatory. This is because all of life's entities have to face risk in any decision and indulge itself in motivation at all times. Otherwise, an entity won't do anything. Evolution decided that it would provide motivation. That motivation has two facilities. First, it provides pleasure in mating with the egg. And secondly, it provides the pleasure in being with that which is attractive to the male. So the female needs to be attractive. So nature provides the human females with beauty. And this provides motivation for the females to make themselves attractive and get the male to look at them. The females understand this, so they go out and they make themselves attractive. And you see this every day. Women put on nice dresses, and they're flowery dresses, and they do this to attract the attention of the male. They make themselves up with nice hair and beautiful faces and makeup and rings and adornments, and that make themselves more attractive to the male and to catch their eye. And the key word here is attractive. Another example of this is that they put lipstick on their lips to make them shiny to attract the attention of the male. And further, evolution endows the females with natural physical attractions. So all in all, the females want to be attractive, and everybody knows this. And males, for males, evolution gives them the impetus to have desire to look at females. And biology dictates it to be so. So now you've got an interesting combinations. Males like to look at attractive things, and females like to be attractive. But the story doesn't stop there, because there's another problem that's popping up here. As we said, the sperm must travel to the egg, and as such, the male has to travel to the female. So there we are at the dance floor. The female puts on her attractions, and the males take a look at those attractions from across the dance floor. At this point, since the males must travel biologically, they're going to have some risk. Social risks. The risks are several. Traveling across the dance floor is a risk in itself, and the second risk is they could suffer rejection by the female. And of course, evolution knows that this is going to happen and prepares the males for these eventualities, because it prepares them by giving them a larger physical presence for the traveling. And that's whether it goes across the dance floor or across the town or wherever the males have to go. But secondly, the males have to be insensitive in order to take the rejection that's going to happen from time to time from the attractive female. So let's list some of the characteristics that we've noted here that evolution has provided the human male. Insensitivity, physically larger, propensity to be attracted by the beauty of the female, and given to movement. Of course, this is a very different from female characteristics, which include sensitivity, given to be attractive, physically diminutive, compared to the males anyway, and more given to be stationary. And naturally, males being insensitive, they might play some games such as noting the attractiveness of the females, and that's in their nature. What are you going to do? But females like to be attractive and compete to be more attractive to each other. And thus there's a competition to become a model in the fashion industry, and that competition's intense, and it's in their nature. In other words, they compete to be judged. Okay, so you now have the females going across the dance floor, seeking the females to which they're attracted, and nature dictates it to be so in order to provide for the continuation of the species. So now we have the introduction of the mating game. All animals, humans, and most other advanced animals have a mating ritual of some kind. The rituals they evolve in order to stabilize the mating game, and they help both sides choose an appropriate companion to mate with. Rituals vary, of course, within species, and there are many other types of ritual behavior. With the human species, we can begin by introducing the fact that there are at least 3 types of general behavior: males with males, males with females, and females with females. Males with male behavior evolve so that they can cooperate with each other in order to produce food when they go out and when they hunted and gathered as they evolved with their families. And females with females also cooperate in the arena of society with their brand of cooperation also as they evolved. And so, interestingly enough, when you inject an opposite sex member into the same-sex group, the same-sex group totally changes its behavior. For example, if you have a group of females and suddenly a male arrives, the treatment and behavior of the females totally changes. And I think we've all noticed this. Same with males. If you've got a group of males and suddenly you drop a female right into the group, their behavior changes too. So in conclusion, the opposite sex changes its behavior according to the social situation. So what does this mean for our subject matter? Well, it means that males in male society behave differently than if they cross the dance floor and join a group of females, and specifically target one female that they're interested in. So here's what's happened to the soccer players. The male soccer team, when in an all-male society, talk about their objectives on the female soccer team. They speak about them objectively and which one fits their fancy, and they reduce that to even by making a notation as to their type and how much intensity there is in the attraction to that female. But when they approach the females, such as when a male soccer player approaches a female soccer player, the male behavior totally changes, and they would never mention the numerical rating of that female soccer player because there are different levels of behavior in society, and so the liberal politically correct administrator would not separate the behavior and try to make the male behavior the same in all instances. But biologically, this is an impossible thing to do. But I mean, well, you could accomplish it. All you have to do is that you would just put them all on drugs. All throughout the whole United States, yep. Take all the males in the world and just put them on drugs. Then you would have politically correct males. This means that the males are equal to the females. That is, they are to behave like females. And just as they're doing to young kids in public school, taking all the males and drugging them. But of course, there's a consequence that would happen. Your birth rate will go down, as males would no longer be interested in making a family and producing progeny, as they would not want to travel across the dance floor anymore, or they would just no longer have the guts enough to do it because we've drugged them. So goodbye biology, goodbye human species, and hello political correctness. And so I've spoken enough, so let's see what Rick has to say about political correctness and the chickification of the American male. What do you think, Rick?
Well, your observations used to fall under the rubric known as common sense, something everyone understood, took for granted the fact that, there were the birds and the bees, and women and men behave differently. and that was accepted for these many thousands of years. I think with the left, you always have to consider, the short-term methods versus what is the long-term objective of, their broader agenda. And in the case of gender neutrality, they've moved on from seeking equality of the sexes to seeking absolute sameness of the sexes. And the reason that's important for them, and it's implicit in Obama's attempt to impose a draft on all females, right, between, a certain age, which on the face of it is, ridiculous, right?
Right.
Because if you were actually going to fight a war, and half of your recruits, and females are, can now fight in any combat position, half of your recruits would be selected by random for various combat roles, and would be female, and half would be male, because that's what would happen in a random draft, right? You couldn't effectively fight a war. That's obvious. But in order to make that kind of overt political maneuver stick, the narrative that men and women are the same has to be made absolutely convincingly. And so the left, beginning in the universities and even in lower school, middle school, high school, have to impose the narrative wherever possible that girls and boys, men and women, are the same. It's easier to do when girls and boys are at elementary school level. Little girls can wrestle little boys. But how the left goes about this, and it is a long-term objective, is absolutely critical to ensuring that they can begin to impose quotas through institutional guidance, otherwise known as force, across all elements of the human experience. So, if you believe, as they do, that men and women are the same, then in the corporate world, corporate presidency should be 50% male, 50% female, because after all, men and women are the same. In the military, all the military positions should be 50% male, 50% female, irrespective of what female and male proclivities historically have been. So the reason this is so important is that if the left can't fashion an argument in terms of discrimination, and that is their final calling card, then they don't believe that they can win in court. But if they can fashion any issue in terms of there being evidence of discrimination, then they can win a case in court. Not any court, maybe certain specific courts. The Ninth Circuit comes to mind, and other liberal courts.
Right.
But if they can make the case that men and women are the same, think of what the implications of that are for undertaking suits through all spheres of life. Beginning with sports teams. And by the way, if they can make that argument, say, with a football team, and it's actually found from direct experience that girls are getting their heads crushed and bones broken, well, that will be reason for saying that football shouldn't be allowed because it's inherently discriminatory. Because men and women are the same, they should both have equal access to this experience, but it's a greater hazard for females based on observed data, and therefore it's not fair,
Eminently
and
so.
therefore it should be eliminated. I mean, the imagination runs wild as to what the ultimate implications of this would be. But when you've got a movement that is so obsessed with thought control, as political correctness is, and whether it's at Harvard or Yale or anywhere else, and so insistent on tracking not only exhibited behavior, but hidden behavior that would normally be kept confidential, and getting at the root of ensuring that bad thoughts aren't even considered. What they can deem to be bad thoughts aren't even considered, or certainly never spoken or documented. Then, there's no length they wouldn't go to, whether it's, looking at hard drives of, high school kids or college kids that are keeping lists, or, tracking their
Right.
internet site behavior, or, anything that would provide evidence that they are somehow thinking thoughts that are, inconsistent with the liberal narrative, and require, therefore, institutional intervention. Because after all, what's the long-term game plan here? To remove students, individuals, males and females, from primarily being raised by families to primarily being guided by an institution or the state, right? In the old days, it was considered good breeding, not to make catcalls at girls, right? It was assumed that the family would exert some sort of training, civilizing behavior over the natural male proclivity to try to attract females, whether that's done in a polite fashion or impolite fashion. And it was left to the family. Well, that's something that has to be dismantled by the left, because otherwise they can't institute institutional control of this kind of behavior, which is what they're after.
Right. Hey, you mentioned something. You said hidden. You were talking about thought control when you said the word hidden?
Yes, because were these Harvard soccer players advertising, on a billboard somewhere that they were rating these girls, with numbers? I doubt that. This was probably something that they were passing around amongst themselves. It wasn't meant to be circulated more widely, but somehow somebody got hold of it.
Right. Okay, great. Great thought. And thanks, Rick, for joining us. And we'll see everybody again next week on The Philosophical Angle. Join us then.
Thank you.